Hi, I'm Whitney.
And I'm Camden. Welcome to Ghosts and Garnets Murder in Idaho.
Murder in Idaho, except for no murder today, because I couldn't handle one more dead body after last week, so we're having a palate cleanser.
Take a break. Taking a break.
Yes, this story is awesome and fascinating, but no one dies, so yay, yes. I had PTSD from last week, I think.
Well, yeah, it was rough. I have to tell everybody, Whitney, about the text that my sister sent me because I am literally dead. So, I laughed for ages because I really tormented my sister, a lot. But this one is just so funny to me because I tried to convince many people of this whole thing. So, the fact that it's worked for 40 years, basically, on somebody is my greatest accomplishment. But anyway, last week my sister texted me, which she is such a great listener. She's super supportive. And so that is my favorite thing. So whenever she is listening to an episode, she always texts me a question or something that she relates to it. But anyway, and so Friday she texted me and said, "What is Whitney's ethnicity?" Uh-huh. And I said, "She's white, man." And she said, "I thought she was Eskimo." To which I replied, "Oh my God, I'm dead. Probably because I used to tell everyone that."
Yes, and you did.
She laughed and then she said, "Dude, you lied to me all the time. I'm a gypsy. Whitney is an Eskimo. You hoe." And I just said, "This is the best of my life." And then I proceeded to send all of these conversations to Whitney when she was on her way to Adele. And it just made my whole life.
Yes. So I was born in Alaska, and Camden used to tell everyone that I was an Eskimo.
She was my Eskimo friend.
Yeah. And I remember when we were in high school, she told her whole, government class or world studies class or something, that her best friend was an immigrant.
I told him you were an Eskimo.
And an Eskimo. And I think probably a lot of people believed it, but it was very funny. Yeah, Jean, you were not the only one that she tormented. She also told me many things that were not true.
Oh, gosh.
So, let me tell you about Adele real quick.
Do tell.
Yeah. So, let me preface this with, the only way you would ever get me to Las Vegas is to see Adele. Ever. Maybe Harry Styles. Maybe I would venture for him. But really, truly, I detest Las Vegas. It is not my scene. I know a lot of people love it. But for me, I texted Camden and I was like, this is every single thing that gives me anxiety rolled up and stuck in one place. Too many people, too loud. It was smoky. You can still smoke inside there. It was just chaos. And just getting from the lobby to our room, which was in another tower. We stayed at Caesars, which is where the concert was. And I felt like I was going to have a panic attack before we could even get to our room. It was just so intense. And I don't think I've been around that many people since before COVID. Truly. Thousands of people. And it was just so loud. And we were supposed to go to dinner at a different casino. And I told Russ once we got to the room, I was like, we're going to have to find a place in this tower to go to dinner because I cannot walk through that again. So we managed to have our room in the same tower that the concert was in. The Coliseum was in the same tower that we were staying in. And then we got a dinner reservation at a restaurant that was in the same tower. So we I did not have to go very far, but we still had to walk through parts of the casino. And it was just awful, but it was worth it because Adele was incredible. And it was one of those, when you go to a concert, there's always somehow you're sat next to people that are awful. or like people in
Yes.
front of you that are awful or
Yes.
behind you or, you know, and it just takes away from the whole experience. We didn't have anyone like that around us. And so it was awesome. It just like
That is
totally
awesome.
enjoyable. And she started off, it was just her and a piano. She walked out onto the stage and I literally started crying. And I am, you guys know, I'm like an emotional robot. She broke me. Like I was a broken, I like cried multiple times throughout the show. But then as the show went on, it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And at the end, like a piano was on fire and it was pouring rain on the stage. And it was amazing. But just vocally, it was unbelievable. And it was probably like the best show I've ever been to.
And you looked stunning.
Thank you.
Were other people dressed up like you were dressed up?
Yes, there were many, many sparkles. Lots of people were dressed up, lots of men in suits. Russ had a suit on.
That's fun.
And yes, I loved my dress. And Poppy told me when I tried it on for her before we left, and she told me that I looked like the mom from the Addams Family. And it literally is like my favorite thing anyone has ever said to me.
I think you can die happy now.
Yeah, it was like, this is my dream, Poppy. Thank you very much for telling me that. She's like my icon. Yeah. So anyway, it was awesome. And I'm so glad we went, but I'm so glad that we're not in Las Vegas anymore.
Yeah, I can understand that.
So anyway, all right. Well, we don't even have anything to be avoiding right now because this story is not a traumatic one.
I mean, it's traumatic for him.
But it was traumatic for him. I don't want to take away his trauma because it really fucked his life up for a good number of years. But the story we have for you today is the unbelievable tale of a man named Rob Nuckols, who was set up by the government so that they could blatantly steal his land. This was a shocking land grab that was attempted by the United States Forest Service, which is the weirdest sentence maybe
That
I've
is a
ever
pretty
said.
weird sentence.
So guys, today we're going to take a little trip to Riggins, Idaho. So a little history on Riggins. Riggins was established in 1894. It was originally a mining camp and was called Gouge Eye, which I don't know why they changed the name, frankly. Gouge Eye, Idaho is fucking badass, and I would live there if it was still there, if it was still called Gouge Eye.
Such a weird, like random, how did they come up with that name? I die to know.
They actually said it in one of the articles. It was something along the lines of the only thing to do there besides mine was fight. And so everybody would go to the saloon and then everybody would get shit-faced and then they would fight each other in the street. And so it was called Gouge Eye because of all of the fighting.
All right. That makes sense.
Yeah. So during the 1940s, the town was almost completely empty as people moved to bigger places for more opportunities and to get their kids in actual schools and stuff. But by the late 1960s, Riggins was becoming a spot for those wanting a quiet place to live where they could be left alone by the government. But it was interesting because Idaho has the largest percentage of land owned by the federal government. Because of that, Idaho is the most policed state by the feds and locals land-wise. The U.S. Forest Service polices this massive piece of land, and the Nez Perce National Forest is 4 million acres stretching through the Idaho Panhandle. It was the Forest Service's job to monitor things like timber theft, cattle on land without permits, commercial poaching. They also keep an eye out for private property to buy if it happens to be connected to the forest, because apparently they like to sort of scoop up any privately bought land and add it to the forest. So Riggins is tucked into this little canyon. Well, it's a big ass canyon, actually. The town of Riggins is pretty little, and it's bordered on one side by a mountain, and then the Salmon River runs on the south side all the way down. And the Salmon River is the longest free-flowing river in the continental U.S. It's called Hell's Canyon, and it is known as the gateway to all kinds of outdoor adventures. It is also kind of an entrance to inaccessible lands. It's called, what's it called? The Whitewater capital of the world. Riggins,
Yeah.
Idaho. Is that what the sign
Yeah.
says outside of town? Tourism is the number one industry. A lot of river sports, steelhead, trout, and salmon fishing. And I was watching this episode of City Confidential about this story, and an old man was being interviewed, and he was like, "You're not going to find sushi here. This is a chicken fried steak kind of place." And it's
It is
true.
very true.
You get that feeling there. So, a little after 12 p.m. on August 26th, 1992, a green Ford Explorer belonging to a man named Rob Nuckols was pulled over in Riggins. Rob was ordered outside of the car at gunpoint and made to lie spread eagle on the pavement of the road. Then he was booked into the Idaho County Jail in Grangeville and charged with a single count of drug trafficking. How did we get here?
Speaking of, I went on a jet boat tour last summer.
You did?
Yes, my parents came down and we went with my husband's parents and family and went into Hell's Canyon on a jet boat, and it was the most fun. I saw
Really?
a bald eagle, which you see those all over in Idaho, but we saw 4 bears right on the side. I've never seen a bear in the wild like that for that long and that up close. It was a mom and 2 babies, and then we saw another one down the river, and then we went up to the dam. It was so fun, so cool. Recommend.
10 out of
10 out of 10. Well, all right. So Rob Nuckols was born outside Twin Falls, Idaho in 1946. Then his family went to Seattle when his dad got a job with Boeing. In the 8th grade, he saw a film at school about the Salmon River, and he made a promise to himself that someday he would live there. After graduation, he traveled around Europe, hitchhiking, and generally just hanging out. He moved back to Seattle and married a woman named Mary, and they had 3 children. In 1975, he met a man who owned a ranch in Hell's Canyon. Rob thought this was fate and asked this man if his family could live there in exchange for taking care of the ranch. This happens a lot all over this area.
Yeah, that's wild.
It is. It's interesting. So, and the man agreed. They moved to Riggins, Idaho, and started the life Rob had always wanted. They lived on $2,000 to $3,000 a year total income that came from bobcat pelts. And this money went to buying their kids' school books so Mary could homeschool them. They lived off the land, hunting deer, fishing, and growing their own food. They had no refrigeration for the first few years, but finally got a propane fridge full of bullet holes they found in the middle of nowhere. This sounds familiar, too. In 1977, the man who owned the land that the Nuckols family lived on sold it to the Forest Service. The government is in the business of buying any privately owned land that borders the national forests, and the owners sold out.
I'm obsessed with the fact that they found a rando refrigerator that someone had used for shooting practice. And they were like, let's put our food in here.
Listen,
Is it full of holes?
I can tell you so many stories.
Okay, so according to the Relocation Act of 1970, the federal government by law is required to give displaced families time to find a new home, pay them relocation services, and reimburse them for any improvements that they had made to the property. So because of that, the Nuckols family were supposed to get all of these things because they were being forced out of where they had been living. Now, a Forest Service agent named Mike Merkley, who, don't sue us, Mike, but you are the bad guy in this story. You're the bad man. He and Rob are like arch nemesises. No, that's not the right way to say it, but I don't know.
Arch enemy?
So, yeah, arch nemesi.
They are a nemesis. He is his nemesis. Okay,
Yeah.
anywho.
Anyway, but he was the agent in charge of the area. And he essentially gave Rob and his family 30 days to move out and offered them $500. Now, Rob declined and refused to leave. Rob then requested a copy of the Relocation Act. And once he read through it and realized that all of these things were required by the feds before he had to leave, he filed a claim in federal court, ready to fight the government for not following the law. Mike Merkley, and if you get into this story a little bit, I mean, the hijinks that Mike Berkeley and his band of dummy agents, they get into trying to run this family off of the ranch. They constantly were hassling the family about things like wood permits when they caught them cutting firewood. One day they drove up to the ranch. Rob and his kids were outside cutting firewood on the land that they lived on. And they were like, "Do you have a permit to cut that firewood?" And Berkeley does say in this documentary that he was just doing his job, that he's so fucking smirky in the whole thing. And he's so convinced that this guy who's just literally just living his life is a criminal, even though there's zero evidence of any criminality ever. It's wild. So in December of 1978, a showdown over bobcat pelts almost turned into a firefight. Now, there's a couple different sides to this story. Merkley said he showed up with Fish and Game officers and confronted Rob about some pelts. And then he said that Rob shouted to his son to get the gun and to shoot the agents. That's what Mike Merkley says. Now, Rob Nuckols said that they confronted him about the pelts. He handed the pelts over. And at that point, Mike Merkley threatened. He said he was going to take Rob's kids from his care.
Makes no sense.
And there is no backstory when they are saying this. There is no reason for it. There's no claims of abuse. Nothing. He just says he's going to take his kids away. And so Rob admits at that point, he yells into the house where his wife and kids are, and he says, he's like, "If they come into the house without permission, shoot him. You're not taking my kids." And this is fucking crazy because this is
78.
Yeah. It's just so reminiscent of Ruby Ridge. Just this just stop it, everyone.
And Dallas. What's with all these pelts causing all these problems?
I know. I don't even think bobcat pelts are that cool, frankly. They're just like giant house cats.
Yeah, but they're scary if they're hunting you. Woo!
That's true. I don't want to be hunted by a bobcat. Anyway, nobody got shot, thankfully. And Merkley eventually backed down. And Rob surrendered under the condition that his kids stay with his wife in the home. And they took Rob to jail where he spent 28 days.
It's so wild.
I looked for more information about this Mike Merkley character because you don't really understand what his problem is. I mean, he hates this man. And he doesn't really even give reasons to it.
I feel like it's just because he's somebody who's standing up to him. It's like, my dick's bigger than your dick.
Yeah. Yeah, you get that small dick energy from him for sure. Don't sue us.
All right. So Rob's federal filing was finally settled by the court, and the judge said Rob and his family were entitled to the maximum amount of reimbursement under the Relocation Act, which was $9,500. The money went to a down payment on another ranch in Hell's Canyon and another piece of land that Rob bought to launch his own business as a real estate speculator. What's a real estate speculator?
It's a person who just buys and sells land.
Okay.
And makes money off of it. It's like a land flipper instead of a house flipper.
But I've never heard that term, real estate speculator. Anyway, Rob was making some good money. He was saving to buy his dream property, which was a sheep ranch right on the Salmon River. In January of 1987, they closed on the 159-acre property on the opposite side of the river from Riggins. You had to get there by boat, so Rob decided to build a tram to get across the river. He did that himself after studying the way chairlifts were built. Now, the stream of Robs would prove to make Rob's life incredibly difficult. You see, this was the last piece of privately owned land on the Salmon River. The Forest Service wanted that land to add to the Nez Perce National Forest. On this jet boat tour that I went on, you pass this sheep farm that you can only get to by boat. And I just wonder if it's the same area.
I'm sure it is. Was there a tram over the river? Like a little carriage on wires?
Well, there are some of those along the way. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about this guy, about this Rob Nuckols guy, is that he's one of those people that isn't formally trained in anything, but can do everything.
Yeah.
And he built an electric tram across a river by himself with no engineering experience, just by looking at plans about how they built a chairlift.
This is not like a small river. This is not like the Boise River where you're
enormous.
tubing down it. No, it's huge and scary. Yes.
Yes. People die in this river. This is not a baby stream. It's crazy.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing.
Yeah. So at this point, they're living on the ranch he's always wanted. And, things are pretty good. He's kind of being left alone by Mike Merkley at this time. But that will soon change. When an incoming call from an old friend came in. A woman named Tammy Kay was an acquaintance of Rob's. Her husband had known Rob, and he had been laid off from his job in Riggins, and so they had moved to Lewiston from Riggins a few years prior. And she called Rob and she said that her husband had gotten involved in cocaine trafficking and that they were in trouble. And she asked Rob if he would help her. And he said yes. He said, why don't you guys come down? You can work on the ranch. And she said she didn't need a job running a tractor. She needed to sell some weed.
Oh.
Now, she didn't have any weed, mind you.
Oh, was she gonna? Okay.
And Rob occasionally smoked weed, but he didn't, grow weed or sell weed. And so he's like, I can't help you. I don't have anybody. I'm not a hookup. And he's like, I don't know where to get weed. And she said, well, she knows a guy, but she's on bad terms with him. And so she essentially asks Rob to be a middleman. She said, if you would pick up this pot from this man for $1,000 and then you can sell it to me. And he's like, all right, essentially just thinking he's going to pick up some pot and he's going to give it to this lady. That's it. And so he's like, all right, I'll help you.
Oh, bad move, Rob.
Not a great move, Rob. So in November of 1991, he met Tammy at a grocery store parking lot. It's always in a grocery store parking lot. And he had bought the weed for $1,000. He sold it to her for $1,000. So he didn't make any money off of this, right? He was just literally like handing it off, essentially. And then he was done. Well, 9 months later, Rob was driving to his office in town when he was pulled over by a state trooper. He was made to get out with a gun to his head, and they told him that he was being charged with drug trafficking. Now, while Rob was being transported, his ranch was being raided by 25 agents from 7 different agencies. State and federal agents, DEA, ATF, helicopters. And guess who was leading the charge of this raid? Mike Merkley. So Mary was in their office in town when a man in a uniform came to the door. He said he had a warrant, but he didn't have it physically with him. And then they raided the office. They found nothing. They seized files and guns, but found no drugs or any evidence of drug trafficking in his car, in their office, or in their home. The raid was a total bust.
Now, let's be clear. Rob Nuckols broke the law.
Yes, he did. But as we will come to see, would he have broken the law if he had not been set up to do so?
The story continues.
Yep.
Rob was released on $15,000 bail on September 2nd, 1992. He'd been set up, and he knew it. He blamed Mike Merkley. If he was convicted of dealing drugs, then his property would be forfeited to the government due to drug trafficking laws. No lawyer would talk to him. They thought he was a nut job. So he does what he had always done and decided to figure it out himself. He starts to study law 14 to 16 hours per day for 13 months. Boise attorney John Allegra agreed to help Rob with courtroom technicalities and research. He mentored Rob, and they made a game plan. First, Rob requests a change of venue, and the trial is moved to Moscow, Idaho, which you're not going to find a better place in northern Idaho for a trial about weed. Sympathetic potheads with a healthy skepticism of government and dislike of them picking on a citizen.
Yeah. Now, guys, I have often been very vocal about my distaste when it comes to people representing themselves in court. I think 99.9% of the time it is a truly horrible idea, but I find it endlessly entertaining to watch.
Listen, Whitney's going to have to eat her words here. Listen, everyone.
I said 99.9. I think this may be the only time, well, you guys will see, but this man who is not a trained attorney makes some bold moves here. So his drug trafficking trial began on September 22nd, 1993 at the Latah County Courthouse. Rob represented himself. Now, the prosecution thinks it is a slam dunk. The cops had Rob on tape selling drugs to Tammy. But they didn't really know Rob Nuckols. See, in court, Rob is credible, he's smart, he's confident, he knows the law. He's not one of those dummies like that fucking Lankford brother who tried to represent himself. He knows his shit here. And in his opening statement, he talked about the surveillance tape, which the state thought was their smoking gun, and he takes it and he kind of turns it to his advantage. He fully admitted that he delivered the pot to Tammy, but he argued it was evidence of entrapment. He was solicited by the state, which caused him to commit a crime. He argued it never would have happened without the government setting him up to do it. So Tammy Kay testified for the prosecution, and she described the buy, walked the jury through the tape, and, was a prosecution witness. Now, the first thing Rob did during cross-examination was ask the judge to read the perjury statute to Tammy. Tammy, after this was read out loud, was visibly shaken and clearly nervous. At this point, Tammy turns on the prosecution. She described how she had been caught with cocaine months before the encounter with Rob, and that the government had forced her to turn informant. They threatened to take her kids away, so she did whatever they wanted. And what they wanted was Rob. She said they told her to say she had seen Rob being shady, that he was a drug dealer, and that it was not true. She admitted that Rob only did it because he was trying to help her get off cocaine. She told Rob where to find the drugs. These were the drugs government provided the pot to be given to Rob.
So
Tammy admitted after the initial handoff that he had given her that she had called Rob multiple times after this first sell, I'm putting in quotes, and that he told her multiple times, absolutely not. It was a one-time thing. It's not something that I do. She also said Rob sold her the pot for the same amount he had bought it for, making no money in the transaction because he was just trying to help her.
That's maddening. Now, this is a shit show. The prosecution conferred with the agents, and they decided not to dismiss the case and took their chances with the jury. This would prove to be the very last mistake they made in this whole clusterfuck of mistakes they made in this entire case. On October 4th, 1993, the jury began deliberations. On October 5th, the jury came back with a verdict. They found him not guilty, and Rob shouted, "Hallelujah!" And the jury laughed out loud. Yes, I love that. A few minutes later, Rob hugged Tammy and thanked her for telling the truth. The jury foreman asked Rob if he wanted to have a beer with them, and they went to a bar where Rob bought a round for the jury. I'm obsessed with him. And the jury now. Mike Merkley said, quote, "Rob is a very experienced criminal, and that he did his job." Rob and Mary still live on the ranch and sell real estate. Rob sells what he calls Indian herbs now, but says it's legit. He wants to be buried on the land he loves.
Anyway, this Mike Merkley guy, saying Rob is a very experienced criminal, literally the only crime that he ever committed was transporting this weed that the government gave him to give to someone else.
So freaking wild. What the hell?
How is he an experienced criminal? It doesn't make any sense to me.
He's just trying to cover his ass. It doesn't make any sense.
And when this guy got arrested, it was all over the news that they had busted this big time drug trafficker. For over a year, everyone thought that he was a drug trafficker, that he was this huge kingpin in the drug world. News articles were legit praising this big raid.
That is so...
For they didn't find anything.
Did they do any research? The media?
No, apparently not. It just, they saw, how many, 7 different agencies and 30 agents and helicopters descending on this ranch, and somebody gets picked up and is charged with drug trafficking. And by the way, a single count of drug trafficking.
Yeah, real kingpin.
So clearly he wasn't a fucking kingpin, but no, it was this big salacious story. And this man for 13 months just has to take it.
It's so terrible.
It's crazy.
It's terrible.
Yeah, and no lawyers would go near him.
Well, because he's one of those live off the land type of guys.
Yeah, they were like, this guy's a crackpot.
Right.
Yeah. So crazy, but it was brilliant for him to move it to Moscow. To ask for it to be moved.
Yeah, it was. But do they get to ask where they want it to be moved to, or was that just happenstance? Was he just lucky?
No, I think he was just lucky.
So
I think that they were hoping that they would move it to, because it could have been, they were in Idaho County. It could have gone either way. They could have moved it to Ada County, which I think probably would not have been as good as Moscow. Because in Moscow, you have the hippie element, but you also have the distrust of the government element.
Right.
I mean, if I would have been on this jury, I would have been like, what the fuck, man?
Right. I know. It seems to be all about Mr. Merkley's ego. Don't sue us. But he just couldn't let it go. He couldn't let this guy have one over on him by knowing the law in the first place of having to take the land and what they deserved in turn.
Yeah, he was pissed they didn't take the $500 and skedaddle. Yeah. And 20 years this guy was after Rob Nuckols.
Get a life, man.
Yeah. He also wears a cowboy hat.
Mike
Merkley. Yeah. In his interview, he has a cowboy hat the whole time on.
Well,
you're not a cowboy, sir.
I do love a real cowboy.
I also do, but this man is not that. So this is crazy. Have you heard of have you read this?
Well, I've heard about it before I read your O Idaho, because I was looking for an O Idaho a while ago.
Oh.
And so I did come across this. It's interesting.
It is interesting. And guys, I'm just going to preface this O Idaho with, do not use this information to commit a crime.
Bozos.
Don't. Heed my warning. This is not a hot tip from me to you. Okay, guys. So there is a 50 square mile area in the Idaho section of Yellowstone National Park in which, as a result of a reported loophole in the Constitution of the United States, a person could theoretically avoid conviction for any crime up to and including murder. It's It's wild. So the U.S. District Court for the District of Wyoming is currently the only United States court to have jurisdiction over parts of multiple states. This is because the jurisdiction includes all of Yellowstone National Park, which extends slightly beyond Wyoming's borders into Idaho and Montana. So in addition, the federal government has exclusive jurisdiction over the park, so crimes committed in the park cannot be prosecuted under state laws, because it is under the federal umbrella. Trials in district court are normally held at the federal courthouse in Cheyenne, Wyoming. However, the Sixth Amendment to the Constitution decrees that juries in federal criminal cases must be made up of citizens who are both from the district and state where the crime was committed. Because of this, charges for a crime alleged to have been committed in this 50 square mile radius would have to be tried before a jury consisting entirely of residents in that area, and would also have to take place in that area. As the Idaho portion of the park is totally uninhabited, no one lives here, a jury of residents of both the state and district would not be able to be impaneled. And as the Constitution guarantees the right to a jury trial, specified in 3 separate times in the Constitution, a defendant facing any felony or misdemeanor charge being unable to receive a constitutional trial could not be legally punished regardless of guilt or innocence. So this loophole in this area was discovered by a law professor at Michigan State named Brian Kaltz. After he discovered the loophole, he worked to have Congress close it. He suggested to lawmakers in Wyoming that the zone of death, which is what they call this area, be included as part of the federal district court for the District of Idaho instead of Wyoming, which would fix the issue. However, Congress ignored Kalt's suggestion. And this area, this zone of death, which is a very scary name for this piece of national parkland, it's still there. Like, no one lives there. If you killed somebody in this area, you could just get away with it.
Don't do it.
Don't kill anyone. That wasn't a suggestion. But isn't that crazy?
It is really crazy. And it's crazy that somebody who they didn't even have to pay or anything came up with a solution to this problem, and they still just, well, it's fine.
Totally ignored it. Yeah. Nope. They were like, meh. Hasn't happened yet. It's funny that there are these like massive pieces of area where not a single person inhabits. And they're like many in Idaho.
Yeah, and then you look at other places around the world that are just a complete cluster.
Uh-huh.
It is bizarro to me. Why doesn't one person live there? Maybe we need to go there, but I don't want to go there because somebody could murder me.
I want to know whether it's called the zone of death.
You could murder people and they get away with it.
But the zone of death to me, like, sort of implies that people are like going down there and like really making use of this.
Do we know if they have?
Like, people are just getting killed. No, that's why Congress didn't do anything.
Because nobody has been killed yet. They're like, oh, we're fine so far. Yes. We're going to take our chances.
Yeah, hasn't been a problem yet.
Well, maybe it's like.
Yeah, I just think it's a very intense name.
Probable
for an area.
Zone of death. Could be.
Possible.
Could be a zone of death.
It should be like the loophole of death.
And that's
not as scary or intense, but I think maybe more appropriate.
Or like, it could happen to you. Zone of death. Hasn't happened to anyone yet, but it could be. Zone of death.
Yeah. Yes. So anyway, yeah, this poor guy really put the work in and was totally ignored.
Poor guy. Well, Mr. Kalt, we're giving you a shout out, so.
Seriously, guys, nobody commit a crime down there.
Don't.
And if you do not tell anyone that you heard it here.
Maybe, wish you guys could just see her eyes.
I'm disclaiming.
I think that was a terrible disclaimer. God. Well, I also want to say something before we end this little show about our whole conversation about DMs, because I was like, not getting any DMs. And then, I did get my first one, which was super sweet. But I was also talking to some other people who are super, super religious listeners of our show. That
I thought you were just going to say super, super religious. And then I was going to get really scared because I thought you were going to tell us something bad, like that they hate us.
No, no, they're very supportive. And they actually were like I've had a few people comment to me, Camden.
Yeah.
We don't DM you because we get to talk to you about it every day. And
yeah,
I do have to say that's very true. I said, I live in a small town where not everybody knows who everybody else is, but I get to talk to people every day who love and support our show. My sister texts me every week. My coworkers, my boss, she's one of my most, what's
she's your biggest fan.
Yeah, maybe that's the way to put it. Like, yeah, she's like, as soon as it comes out on Wednesday morning, she's listening to it before work, and I'm obsessed with that. But anyway, so I do appreciate everybody who listens and reaches out to me. The DM thing was kind of like, maybe it was a little jealousy, okay, guys? But I still have some wonderful supporters.
I don't think anybody thought it was that deep. I think people knew that you were kidding.
That's probably true, but you know me. If I don't say it out loud, I'm going to overthink it.
It's funny. My friend Allison, she texts me really early, which is fine because I'm awake very early every day. But she listens to it when she's getting ready for work. And so she'll text me and be like, da da da. And last week she was listening to the ballet episode and she was like, Wearmart is what Winco used to be called.
Hey.
And I said, really? And she said, yes. Winco was Wearmart, but then Walmart came along and they didn't like how close the name was, so they changed it to Winco.
Well, there's a little tidbit of knowledge.
And I said, I did not know.
Also, you don't have your phone on silent? Oh, well, you said that it doesn't matter if she texts you in the morning because you're awake anyway. But it would neither here nor there.
No, like I'm awake downtown having my coffee. Not downtown, downstairs, having my coffee when she texts me.
All right.
I'm not like in bed.
Well, even if I was in bed, everyone's on silent.
I wake up at like 5 a.m.
Even on Saturday and Sunday?
No, this morning I slept in until 7. Yeah. My body just naturally, listen, I went to bed last night at 7:15 because I did not feel good. And I slept in till 7 this morning.
Slept in.
Yeah. I can't sleep in past that. I just can't do it. Like my body won't let me. I don't know. I also really enjoy the mornings because everyone is still asleep at my house. And so it's time where I don't have to talk to anyone.
That's how my mom is.
I can just sit in the quiet and have my coffee. And I would much prefer to have an hour of that than an extra hour of sleep. Now, I can say that because I usually get to take naps.
Yeah, there's the caveat. All right, that is the story of Rob Nuckols and how he did an amazing job at defending himself in court and his idiot nemesis, Mike Merkley. Don't sue us.
I'm going to call this episode, Don't Sue Us. Rob Nuckols versus Mike Merkley.
Yes. All right, perfect.
So, guys, yes, thank you for listening. If you would like to become a subscriber and get some extra content, you can hit the button in the show notes that says support the show. It will take you right to Patreon and you can check it out. You get early access episodes, ad-free episodes, and an extra monthly full-length bonus episode. And if you are a Garnet level subscriber, you also get a weekly Friday video show where we chit-chat about all kinds of things. And if you would like to sponsor the show, you can reach us at ghostsandgarnets@gmail.com. Have a fantastic week.
Bye.